There is a photograph one can imagine of Christina Onassis at the edge of the sea. Dark hair, watchful eyes, the name of a dynasty resting upon her shoulders before she was old enough to understand its weight. She was born into ships, islands, diamonds, private rooms, famous guests and doors that opened before she had touched the handle. And yet, almost from the beginning, she seemed less like a princess than a child standing beneath a borrowed crown. The world saw the fortune. It saw the yacht named for her, the private island, the family whose business crossed oceans and whose scandals traveled even faster. Later, it saw the marriages, the divorces, the photographs, the sudden death in Argentina. It mistook exposure for knowledge, but buried beneath the Onassis name was something quieter and much more pitiful. A girl who wanted to be chosen, a daughter who wanted to be enough, a woman who inherited nearly everything except the thing she most desired. Christina Onassis did not fall from poverty into ruin. She fell from abundance into loneliness. Her scepter was not taken by enemies nor lost in battle. It was placed in her hands too young, too cold, too heavy. This is the story of Christina Onassis, the heiress who possessed the sea and could not find a shore. December 11th, 1950. New York City in winter, the streets bright with commerce and cold light. In a private clinic far from the ports and islands that would shape her life, Christina Onassis was born. Her father was Aristotle Socrates Onassis, the Greek shipping magnate whose life had already become the sort of story men like to tell over cigars. Smyrna, Argentina, risk, hunger, calculation, ships. He had arrived in South America young and poor, then built himself into one of the most famous businessmen of the 20th century. Her mother was Athina Livanos, daughter of another great Greek shipping family. Aristotle and Tina had married in 1946. Their first child, Alexander, had been born in 1948. He was the heir the father wanted, the son, the future. Christina came 2 years later. From the outside, she entered a kingdom of rare privilege. The family moved between New York, Greece, France, England, and the Mediterranean world of shipping houses and private harbors. There were servants, international schools, famous visitors, and rooms where children were expected to behave like miniature diplomats. Her father's yacht, the Christina O, was named after her. It had been transformed from a former warship into one of the first modern superyachts, a floating palace where leaders, film stars, aristocrats, and singers passed through glittering rooms. A child might have thought such a vessel was magic, and perhaps, for moments, it was. There were toys no ordinary child could imagine. Dolls with handmade outfits from Dior, a nursery decorated with murals by Ludwig Bemelmans, the creator of Madeline. There were famous guests: Churchill, Garbo, Gregory Peck, royalty, magnates, the procession of the centuries admired and envied. Yet all the costly objects in the room could not make the room warm. Christina's early life carried emotional instability beneath the display. Her parents' marriage was already troubled. Aristotle traveled constantly, worked constantly, and pursued his own desires with the certainty of a man used to command. Tina struggled with motherhood and with her marriage. Christina and Alexander were often in the care of servants. The house was rich, but it was not settled. At 3 years old, Christina stopped speaking. A psychological assessment in Zurich called it selective mutism and blamed an overprotective home. There was another reading, too, that the child's silence was an attempt to draw attention from parents who were too absent, not too close. Christina herself, when later asked, said she did not remember doing it deliberately. It hardly mattered. The small girl had found that silence could bring people near. She was educated across countries: the Hewitt School, St. Timothy's, Headington School in Oxford, Queen's College in London. She learned languages, manners, the codes of wealthy society. She learned how to sit at tables where everything was polished and nothing was simple. She learned that attention could be granted, withdrawn, bought, or withheld. Her father gave her a Greek pet name meaning "my golden one," yet even that tenderness had a shadow. In the Onassis household, love was rarely simple. It came through pride, possession, control, and absence. The golden one was also the difficult one, the wrong one, the daughter who did not look quite right beside her elegant mother and aunt, and her father, who saw himself in her face, was not always pleased with what the mirror showed him. Children in such houses learn the dialect of conditional warmth early. Christina learned it before she could fully name it. She learned that affection arrived on a schedule no child could predict. She learned that praise had a price, and that beauty had a measurement, and that even her own body was a thing the family had opinions about. These were not lessons taught in words. They were taught in the long pauses, in the doors that closed, in the comparisons made aloud by adults who thought she was not listening. She was, of course, always listening. Christina was still a child, but the pattern had been set. She had the trappings of a throne before she had a home. The crown was already heavy, and she had not yet been told what it was for. And then, the adults began to break the world around her. Before grief became the permanent weather of Christina Onassis's life, there were years when the family still seemed magnificent. To the public, the Onassis world was all movement and shine. Ships crossed oceans under the force of Aristotle's will. The Christina O received guests who understood power and spectacle. The yacht itself was almost a character in the family drama. A former Canadian anti-submarine frigate turned into a vessel of polished extravagance, its past as a weapon buried beneath carpets, paintings, and cut glass. There was something almost too perfect in that transformation. A warship disguised as a pleasure craft, a family disguised as secure, a little girl disguised as fortunate. The Onassis name placed Christina in rooms most people never saw. As she grew older, she was surrounded by the rituals of international wealth, formal dinners, ports, island gatherings, summer crossings, servants who appeared before one had finished needing them. Her family's life stretched between Paris, London, New York, Greece, the Riviera, and Skorpios, the private island Aristotle bought and turned into a symbol of possession. Even as a child, Christina showed a hunger for ordinary comfort. Amid the finest Greek food and luxury kitchens, she loved the cheeseburgers made by her American nanny. It is a small detail, but small details often tell us more than formal portraits. The heiress of the sea wanted something simple, familiar, made for her by someone who noticed what she liked. Her brother Alexander remained central to her life. He was older, expected to inherit the Onassis business, and treated as the son through whom the family's future would continue. The burden placed on him was different from hers, but no less heavy. Christina and Alexander grew up inside the same beautiful disturbance. Whatever distance lay between children and parents, brother and sister understood something of each other's loneliness. Christina was sensitive, lonely, and insecure about her appearance. She was often compared with the women around her, her mother and aunt, who were admired for delicacy and elegance. Christina resembled her father more strongly, and in a world that prized a narrow kind of beauty, this became another wound. Her weight drew comment. Her body became a place where approval and shame met. Aristotle, not a man known for gentleness, pressured her to lose weight and to be beautiful because she was an Onassis. And yet, there was promise in her. She was not merely the caricature later made of her, the poor little rich girl, the difficult heiress, the woman mocked in print. She was observant. She could be generous. She would later show more ability in business than many expected. She was born into a gilded life, yes, but not an empty mind. The defining force of her youth was not one moment, but the slow realization that her family's splendor was public property. Their holidays were watched, their quarrels traveled, their lovers became headlines. When her father's affairs entered the world's conversation, Christina did not simply suffer private embarrassment, she suffered it beneath 1,000 eyes. The girl on the yacht had every material sign of good fortune. The trouble was that the yacht itself was never still. Its rooms moved from port to port, and so did Christina. No harbour held her for long. No arrangement remained safe for long. Every luxury had movement in it, and every movement carried unease. She had walked through floating rooms made to impress prime ministers and stars. She had seen what wealth could build. She had not yet learned what it could not protect. There is a particular loneliness in being the child of a famous house. The world watches such a child grow up, but it does not see her. It catalogues her clothing and her friends and her reported weight, and it imagines that it knows her. It does not. Beneath the catalogue, there is always a child wondering whether the people closest to her are looking at her, or at the name attached to her face. Christina would wonder this question all her life, and would die without ever quite knowing the answer. The sea was bright. The deck was polished. Below it, the first cracks had already opened. The first great wound came through her parents' marriage. Aristotle Onassis had been unfaithful before the world fully knew it, but when Maria Callas entered the story, secrecy gave way to spectacle. Callas was not merely a lover, she was an event. The famous opera singer, dramatic and admired, became attached to Aristotle in a way that turned private betrayal into international gossip. The affair began around the time of a Mediterranean cruise aboard the Christina O, with important guests nearby. The setting could hardly have been more elegant. The injury could hardly have been more public. For Tina Livanos, it was humiliation. For Christina, still a child, it was bewilderment. She would later remember the night her mother left the yacht with the children as a moment of confusing loss. She did not understand every adult motive, but she understood that something in the family had been destroyed. Aristotle and Tina separated in 1959, when Christina was 8. The divorce followed in 1960. The marriage had been unstable for years, and the Callas affair was central to its collapse. Tina later married Stavros Niarchos, Aristotle's great shipping rival, which turned family life into a knot of money, revenge, and dynastic calculation. The divorce deepened Christina's insecurity. Her childhood mutism returned in some form when she learned of it. She had already learned that silence could summon attention. Now she learned another lesson, that even the richest household could split open without warning. We have all known, fellow travelers, some version of this child, one who watches the adults and becomes older not by time but by alarm. Such children do not always cry in the room. Sometimes they study the room. They learn who is leaving before anyone says so. Then came Jacqueline Kennedy. In 1968, Aristotle Onassis married the widow of President John F. Kennedy on Skorpios. The wedding itself was small by Onassis standards, held on the private island, attended by family and a carefully selected handful of guests. The world, of course, did not need to be there to have an opinion. The headlines crossed every ocean within hours. The most famous widow in America had married one of the wealthiest men in the world, and no one could quite agree whether it was a love match, a transaction, a tragedy, or all three. The marriage joined Greek shipping wealth with American political mythology. To Aristotle, it offered prestige, legitimacy, a name known everywhere. To the world, it was spectacle. To Christina and Alexander, it was another intrusion. The children did not warmly accept Jacqueline as a stepmother. Christina was especially hostile. She saw in Jackie everything she feared she was not: slender, poised, admired, world-famous. Worse still, Jackie possessed her father's attention, and possessed it, Christina believed, not through love, but through a kind of strategic glamour her father had always found difficult to resist. Christina came to see her stepmother as an obsession of Aristotle's, and the marriage intensified her sense of comparison and exclusion. She had spent her entire life being measured against women she could never quite become. Jackie was simply the most famous of them. In the Greek shipping world, marriage was rarely only romance. It could be a tool, an alliance, an instrument of family ambition. Christina learned this as attempts were made to arrange suitable matches for her. Efforts involving Philippe Niarchos, her first cousin, and later Peter Goulandris, another Greek shipping heir whose fortune could have strengthened family interests. Christina resisted. Her father pressed. Her mother approved some of these plans. Even love was discussed as though it were cargo. Aristotle, when he found a man he believed suitable, was not a man who easily took no for an answer. He pressed Christina toward Goulandris with the same focused will he had once used to acquire ships and shipping routes. He extracted promises. He invoked family duty. He spoke of the future of the Onassis name as though the matter were already settled. Christina nodded when she had to, said what she had to say, and continued her own quiet rebellion through other men her father did not approve of. The pattern would define much of her adult life: outward agreement, inward refusal, and the small humiliations that followed when the two could no longer be reconciled. The throne did not fall in a single day. These things seldom do. It sagged quietly beneath infidelity, remarriage, public humiliation, and the steady knowledge that Christina's own heart might never be allowed to belong entirely to herself. She was 18 when her father married Jackie. She was wealthy. She was watched. She was already learning to mistrust affection. And soon the family would lose the one person Christina could not replace. January 1973, Athens. A winter day, pale and cool, with the sky holding that hard light which makes machinery look even more unforgiving. Alexander Onassis, 24 years old, was flying a small amphibious aircraft near Athens. He had loved planes, though his father had not loved the danger. He was considered a careful pilot. He was also the son around whom Aristotle Onassis had arranged the future. He had been an experienced flyer, drawn to the kind of small, low aircraft that demand skill and offer no margin for error. He had survived many flights. He would not survive this one. The plane went down shortly after takeoff. Alexander was pulled from the wreckage alive but gravely injured. He was rushed to hospital. Doctors were summoned from across Europe. His father, in those terrible hours, used every ship and every connection and every dollar at his command to gather the best men in the world around his son's bed. None of it was enough. The end came from catastrophic injuries. For Christina, the details mattered less than the result. Her brother was gone. Alexander had been more than a sibling. He had been the intended successor, the male heir, the one through whom Aristotle's business and name were expected to continue. He had also been Christina's companion inside a family where affection often arrived tangled with demand. They had grown closer as adults, partly through shared frustration with their father. In a house of powerful people, Alexander was one of the few people Christina could trust without calculation. He had been her brother in the way that mattered most, not by blood alone, but by shared understanding of what it meant to grow up an Onassis. And then he was a name on a tombstone. and the room she had once shared with him was empty in a way no room had ever been empty before. His death shattered Aristotle. The shipping magnate who had survived catastrophe, built a fortune, fought rivals and governments, now faced the one event no fleet could outrun. He never fully recovered. He became consumed by suspicion, imagining sabotage or murder and questioning those around him. Investigations followed, money was offered, explanations were sought, rewards were posted for evidence of conspiracy. None came. But grief is rarely satisfied by evidence, and Aristotle was not a man accustomed to losses he could not eventually buy his way around. In the months after Alexander's death, the household of the great Greek shipping magnate became a place of paranoia and dimmed light. He aged visibly. Friends who had known him for decades barely recognized the man who appeared at meetings. The empire continued by inertia. Aristotle did not. Christina's own life changed at once. She was no longer the second child, the daughter beside the heir. She was the survivor. The future of the Onassis fortune, once directed toward Alexander, turned toward her with a force she had not chosen. Her father began preparing her more directly for involvement in the business. She worked in his offices and became more closely associated with the family interests. And that was the moment the scepter slipped. Not because Christina had failed, and not because she had reached for it. It slipped because the hand meant to receive it had been buried. At Skorpios, the private island that had hosted Aristotle's marriage to Jacqueline Kennedy only a few years earlier, Alexander was laid to rest. The island of celebration became an island of burial. Christina stood among mourners in a grief that could not be decorated into dignity. Her brother was dead. Her father was broken. The family's future had been rewritten by impact, metal, and winter air. The world watched, as it always watched the Onassis family. Newspapers reported, society murmured. The old phrase Onassis curse would gather around the family in the years to come, though it was more myth than explanation. Still, one understands why people reached for it. Some lives acquire so much public misfortune that ordinary language seems inadequate. Yet there was nothing supernatural here. There was only a young man dead, a father undone, and a daughter left standing in a room where everyone had expected someone else. Christina was 22. She had lost her brother. She had inherited expectation before she inherited the estate. And grief, having entered, did not leave by the same door. After Alexander's death, the losses came with a terrible rhythm. In October 1974, Christina's mother, Tina Livanos Onassis Niarchos, died in Paris. The cause given was pulmonary edema, with whispers of an overdose of sleeping pills behind it. The circumstances troubled Christina deeply. She suspected Stavros Niarchos, Tina's husband, of foul play, particularly because Tina's sister Eugenia, Niarchos's previous wife, had died under circumstances that also caused suspicion. Other members of the family had questioned him too. Tina herself and much of the Livanos family had believed Niarchos innocent. No simple certainty was ever reached. Only suspicion, grief, and another room with a body in it. Christina sought an autopsy and spoke of her suspicions. Niarchos retaliated by revealing knowledge of one of Christina's earlier suicide attempts and implying that the stress of it had contributed to Tina's death. Thus, even mourning became conflict. The tragedy was not only that people died, it was that each death seemed to leave behind accusation, bitterness, and mistrust. Then Aristotle declined. His health worsened after Alexander's death, myasthenia gravis, severe physical deterioration, a final hospital period in Paris. On March 15, 1975, Aristotle Onassis died. He was 69. Christina was 24. In roughly 2 years, she had lost her brother, her mother, and her father. She was left as the principal private heir to a fortune estimated after liabilities at around $500 million, though the press would speak of $1 billion. Aristotle's will divided the estate between Christina and the Alexander S. Onassis Foundation, created in memory of the son who had died too young. Christina inherited ships, money, property, influence, business responsibility, and the Onassis name. She inherited the empire. She did not inherit peace. At Aristotle's funeral on Skorpios, Jackie Kennedy Onassis was present. A financial settlement followed, in which Jackie accepted millions to relinquish further claims to the estate. Christina's dislike of her stepmother was clear, and the estate dispute sharpened it. Even at the graveside, money had work to do. It is the part of these stories we want least to hear. The part that says, even at the top, even with everything, this is what waits. Paperwork after burial, negotiations after sobbing, signatures while the flowers are still fresh. Christina tried to continue. To her credit, she was not merely idle. She worked in her father's offices, took on responsibility for part of the shipping business, and was associated with the Onassis Foundation. Men who dismissed her as only a troubled heiress underestimated the business instinct she had absorbed from her father. And yet her private life continued to break in public. Her first marriage came soon after her father's death. The husband was Joseph Bolker, an American real estate developer, much older than she was, divorced, and a father. They were married in Las Vegas. Aristotle had strongly opposed him in life, objecting to age, background, religion, and the fact that Bolker was not his chosen man. The marriage lasted about 9 months. Her second marriage was to Alexander Andreadis, a Greek shipping and banking heir. At first, he seemed more suitable to her world. The marriage lasted about 14 months. Christina came to believe he wanted her money, including a request for $20 million. Whatever the exact emotional truth, the marriage ended. Her third husband was Sergei Kauzov, a Soviet shipping official. Their marriage in 1978 attracted international attention because of Cold War politics and speculation about whether Soviet intelligence had taken an interest in the Onassis shipping world. Some dismissed the darker theories. Others thought the marriage had propaganda value. The image was extraordinary, even by Onassis standards, the daughter of one of the West's great capitalist tycoons, settling, however briefly, into Soviet domestic life. Christina tried. She moved between Moscow and the homes she still kept elsewhere, but life in Moscow did not hold. The cold of it, in every sense, was not the cold she had been built for. The relationship ended, and Kauzov received a valuable settlement, a ship by one telling. There were other attachments too. There was an infatuation with Mick Flick, heir to the Mercedes-Benz fortune, whose affection was not returned. Her desire for love became so exposed that the world learned to mock it. The press developed a habit of cataloguing her appearance, her weight, her latest companion, her latest hope. And she, for her part, did not always know how to stop reading what was written about her. She struggled with depression, body image, dieting, overeating, pills, and loneliness. She put friends on payroll, paid people to be available, imposed strict rules in her homes. Some of these details are uncomfortable. Some pass through a sensational lens, but the pattern is consistent. Christina feared abandonment, and money became a poor substitute for trust. There is something particularly bitter in being able to buy almost anything except the one thing that cannot be bought. Christina spent the second half of her life learning this lesson again and again in 100 small humiliations. In March 1984, Christina married for the 4th time. His name was Thierry Roussel, a French pharmaceutical heir and businessman. Of all her marriages, this one mattered most, because it would give her the child she loved beyond the reach of calculation. On January 29, 1985, in France, Christina gave birth to Athina Hélène Roussel. The child was named for Christina's mother. For Christina, motherhood appears to have been the deepest and purest attachment of her life. She was intensely devoted to Athina. After so many rooms of bargaining love, this was something different. A baby did not ask for ships. A baby did not read the papers. A baby did not measure a woman against Jackie Kennedy, Maria Callas, or the ghosts of Greek society. Athina became Christina's treasure, and perhaps her last steady light. Yet even this marriage failed. Christina learned of Roussel's ongoing relationship with Swedish model Marianne Gaby Landhage. Roussel had fathered a child with Landhage only months after Athina was born, and would father another later. Christina and Roussel divorced in 1987. The crown had become hollow. It opened doors, yes. It could not keep anyone inside the room. She lost a brother, she lost a mother, she lost a father. Then, year after year, she lost the small hopes by which people survive. And still, one hope remained. By the late 1980s, Christina was moving between Europe, Greece, South America, and the rooms she kept in cities that no longer felt like home. She remained immensely wealthy and emotionally unsettled. Argentina held a particular meaning because Aristotle had built his early business identity there after leaving the old world behind. The country was where her father had become himself, where 6 decades earlier, a young Greek refugee with $250 had walked off a ship and begun the work of becoming Aristotle Onassis. Perhaps, Christina thought, the place that had remade her father could offer her something too. A quiet, a second beginning. A page that had not yet been written upon by anyone but herself. She traveled there in 1988 and stayed with friends near Buenos Aires. She had recently bought a ranch outside the city. She kept the company of a man named Luis Sosa Basalo, who was paid generously for his time and whose comments about her appearance wounded her in the old, familiar way. Such arrangements add to the same portrait, a woman trying to arrange peace from fragments. Even at the end, when she might have chosen solitude, she could not quite stop reaching for company, however imperfect. The fear of being alone had always run deeper in her than the fear of being hurt. She was losing weight. Years of compulsive eating and diet pills had taken their cost. The body that had carried her through grief, scandal, 4 marriages, and a daughter's birth was beginning to falter quietly beneath the gilded surface. Her heart, in particular, had grown tired in ways the doctors warned about, and the gossip columns did not. There was talk in that final stretch of a new beginning, a possible romance with another man. The ranch outside Buenos Aires, where she could ride and walk and breathe air that did not smell of headlines. Time with Athina, who was 3 years old and the center of her mother's world. Plans even for more children, through artificial arrangement, since the conventional path had brought her so little joy. After a lifetime of public spectacle, Christina seemed to be reaching, at last, for something private, something quiet, something her own. It is one of the small cruelties of these stories that the calm so often arrives just before the end. Christina was not, in those last weeks, the woman she had been 5 years earlier. She had begun, perhaps, the work of becoming someone gentler with herself. There is no way to know what she might have made of the second half of her life. There never is. She was 37, November 19th, 1988. Tortuguitas, outside Buenos Aires. In a country house, after an ordinary evening, Christina took a sleeping pill and went to bed. The next morning, her maid found her in the bathroom. she was already gone. The early reports raised questions because she was young, rich, famous, and dead. Argentine authorities investigated. Rumors spread, as rumors always do, around the wealthy dead. Medication, suicide, murder, overdose. The autopsy returned a verdict of acute pulmonary edema associated with heart failure, the same affliction that had taken her mother in Paris 14 years earlier. Whispers about slimming pills and sleeping pills lingered in the press, but no grounds were found for foul play or suicide. Her body was flown to Greece. She was buried in the Onassis family cemetery on Skorpios, alongside her father and brother. The island that had hosted her father's wedding to Jacqueline Kennedy, that had received Alexander after the plane crash, that had stood for everything the Onassis name had built and lost, received her too. The graves on Skorpios filled, one by one, with the people Christina had loved and lost. She joined them in winter, the way her brother had left her in winter 15 years before. The scepter lay fallen, not in a palace hall, but in the quiet after a bathroom door opened, and a 3-year-old girl was left to inherit the name. Christina Onassis's life is often reduced to an old phrase, "poor little rich girl." It is a phrase with a cruel neatness to it, the kind people reach for when sorrow is too large for the room. The truth was larger. Christina had immense privilege. She had ships, homes, jewels, servants, aircraft, islands, and access to the guarded rooms of the powerful. She also had a childhood marked by emotional instability, parents who broke apart in public, a father whose love was bound to control, a mother who died too soon, a brother lost in a crash, and a life watched by strangers who enjoyed her unhappiness almost as entertainment. We watch these lives, fellow travelers, and something in us hesitates. It is easy to envy the yacht. It is harder to envy the child on it. Easy to count the money, harder to count the funerals. Her daughter Athina inherited Christina's private fortune, while the Alexander S. Onassis Foundation remained separate. Athina also inherited the burden of being the last direct descendant of Aristotle Onassis. In that, the story did not end with Christina's burial. It continued as dynastic stories do, in lawyers' rooms, trustees' rooms, nursery rooms, and the long corridors of other people's expectations. The child Christina had loved more than anything else was now the center of a different kind of inheritance. One that came not only with wealth, but with the weight of every name buried on Skorpios. At the beginning of this story, Christina seemed to possess the sea. After all of it, one sees the opposite. The sea possessed her story, beautiful, restless, glittering, and cold. The girl who had once stopped speaking to be noticed. The young woman who had learned that even love arrived wrapped in negotiation. The heiress who married 4 times searching for what no fortune could deliver. The mother who for 3 brief years held something that asked nothing of her in return. She had walked through floating rooms once made to impress prime ministers. She had carried a name that opened every door in every capital. She had inherited an empire. And somewhere along the way, the doors had begun to close behind her one by one, until only the smallest room remained. There is a kind of life that the world watches and does not see. Christina lived such a life. The photographs caught her clothing, her companions, her changing weight, her latest scandal. But they never quite caught her. She remained, even at the center of her own legend, a woman half glimpsed through a curtain, half known, half loved. The empty throne, the silent palace, the fallen scepter, resting where no fortune could lift it. The sea, in the end, kept what it had always kept, and the rest of us, fellow travelers, are left only with the story. If you found yourself in this story, even for a moment, you may find yourself in the next one too. Subscribe to The Fallen Scepter and stay with us. There are many more lives to remember.